Guys, the Raptors allegedly are going to make one move heading into this deadline. And it's either Gary Trent or Fred VanVleet. Nobody's going to be trading for Pascal or OG Anunoby because supposedly the rumors are that an OG Anunoby deal is going to cost at least 3 first round picks and a prospect and probably a good player. That's what supposedly they want a Donovan Mitchell deal for basically OG Anunoby and like a Rudy Gobert deal for Pascal. That's what the Raptors would want. And no team's going to offer that, especially mid-season. Those type of deals happen in the offseason when you feel better moving players. Now, Gary Trent and Fred VanVleet are the two players that are heading into free agency and that are being deemed as guys who could be casualties, as someone looking from the outside. And I personally think Gary Trent Jr. should be prioritized to keep. 23 years old, former 5-star recruit. You keep him. You keep him. Fred VanVleet, he's going to be on the wrong side of 30 soon, or sooner rather than later. And he's going to walk in free agency. You should not pay him. You should pay Gary Trent. Now, Fred VanVleet is now drawing interest from several teams. Obviously, we talked in the past, the Orlando Magic and the Phoenix Suns have set their sights in free agency to sign Fred VanVleet. With that being said, it makes sense that a team might try to trade for Fred now, especially if they can communicate with Fred VanVleet's agent, who he just parted away and is now joining a new agency. I forget what Fred VanVleet new agent. Let me see who's his new agent. He drops his agent and it doesn't say that he's getting a new agent. Okay, well, he's now seeking new representation. He hasn't signed with a new agent yet. But which makes it a bit harder that he now doesn't have an agent, because if he had an agent, you can technically avoid tampering and have your agent communicate with a team that is interested in trading for you, and you can verbally agree in principle to re-signing in the summertime if they trade for you, so they don't feel like it's just going to be a rental. But we're hearing that the Miami Heat, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Los Angeles Clippers, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Dallas Mavericks, the Phoenix Suns, the Washington Wizards, and the Orlando Magic are all teams looking to get Fred VanVleet in a trade or in the summer. The Magic are reportedly looking to bring in a point guard for the long term to develop next to their young talent, which assumes that VanVleet would resign with the team should he get traded there. And VanVleet's widely expected to opt out of his contract because he has a player option. So let's just go through every team there. The Miami Heat, it's obviously would be a deal around Kyle Lowry to send Kyle Lowry back, but I don't know if that would be possible because of the sign and because of the trade rule that you can't trade a player back. So if that is something possible, it would have to be a deal surrounding Duncan Robinson, Caleb Martin, and probably Nikola Jovic. And I don't think that's a strong offer. The Lakers is obviously Russell Westbrook and a first-round pick. I don't think that's a strong enough offer. And if that was the case, they would also have to include like Thad Young and Chris Boucher with Fred VanVleet in that deal, because you'd have to make up like $25 million in salary because of the size of Russell Westbrook's salary. The Clippers, a little again difficult, but you could get it done. John Wall with Norman Powell could be traded now because he traded to Portland. But I don't think Norman Powell would be the guy. It would be Marcus Morris, maybe, probably more Robert Covington, John Wall, and Amir Coffey would get that deal done. But again, I don't think that's a deal they would want. You look at Minnesota, this is where it starts to get interesting. If you trade like Thad Young and Fred VanVleet, I bet you they would trade you D'Angelo Russell. And you would assume that if you can communicate with D'Angelo Russell, the Toronto Raptors, and say, hey, we'll trade for you. Will you re-sign with us? And he'll probably say, yes, I want to stay somewhere long term. Now, the next one is the Dallas Mavericks. Your assumption right there would be, first they would try to be like, here's Davis Bertans, and I don't even know. Like, they would probably, here's a first-round pick, here's Davis Bertans, and we'll also give you JaVale McGee, which I hope they would laugh in their face and be like, if we were going to do that deal, give us 2 first-round picks, both unprotected, and we'll maybe think about it. But obviously the deal would have to be around like a Spencer Dinwiddie with some second-round picks, or Spencer Dinwiddie and unprotected first for Fred VanVleet. Now, Phoenix, it gets a bit more interesting because you could get Chris Paul, but is Chris Paul really who you want to trade for if you're trading, Fred VanVleet? Because you would still, another deal that you would have to do like Fred VanVleet and Thad Young, and they would trade you Chris Paul and Bismack Biyombo or Josh Okogie in there. So I don't know if that's the best deal. While the Wizards, it gets a bit more interesting with Washington, because Washington can actually give you something. Washington has 3 guards, Kendrick Nunn, DeLon Wright and Monte Morris. I'd assume that they want to keep DeLon Wright and Monte Morris. I don't know how soon you can trade Kendrick Nunn, but Kendrick Nunn would be obviously someone you want to deal. If you could do a deal of Will Barton, Kendrick Nunn, and Johnny Davis, I think they do it. I think you can probably convince them to take Johnny Davis. I'm personally on the page to get the hell rid of Johnny Davis, but the deal would be probably Will Barton, Johnny Davis, and because our man is making, I believe it is 21 million. So a deal of Johnny Davis and Will Barton gets you to like 19.2, so you're about 2 million short. So you could literally be like, okay, here's Taj Gibson. You could do a deal of Taj Gibson, Will Barton, and Johnny Davis, where Taj Gibson and Will Barton could be bought out, and you take on Johnny Davis and they give you some second round picks. Would you do that? You get a prospect in Johnny Davis, who's horrible. You get basically, you just create cap space and you get a bunch of second round picks, maybe a first, but I doubt they would trade a first. And I think the best deal is the Orlando Magic, because if you did this deal, they would be trading you Markelle Fultz. It is clear that, like, Markelle Fultz, I love him and everything, and he's becoming a good basketball player, but I don't think they're sold on Markelle Fultz. So they could do you a deal of, here's Markelle Fultz, okay? And we'll give you Markelle Fultz and Chuma Okeke. And that right there, Chuma Okeke, there, RJ Hampton, Chuma Okeke, and Markelle Fultz for Fred VanVleet. I personally think that's the best deal, because you get, yes, RJ Hampton's option was declined, but you could bring him back in free agency. So he's a guy who I personally think is more of a Quentin Grimes swingman who's been played at point guard. Markelle Fultz as a replacement, you've got him for another year. The other deal is you could do, okay, send us Markelle Fultz and Jalen Suggs, and we'll send you this year's first round pick unprotected. If that deal came across my table, I would be like, maybe. You got my attention. So that's where I think it becomes interesting in the sense that, could that be a deal we see? Is that a deal that should be something? I don't know. Let me hear your thoughts. Bye.